Hello, everyone. This is Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about integrated compliance. We'll be providing an introduction to the One Audit Bootcamp from ControlCase. I think you're going to find that very interesting. And we're going to spend a lot of time on IT compliance and how you can go beyond a simple checklist to build a more comprehensive program. And we've got one of the world's leading experts here. My colleague, Kishore Vaswani, is on. He's the Chief Strategy Officer for ControlCase. Kishore, welcome. Welcome to the discussion.
Ed, it's good to be here as always with you. And thanks for hosting this webinar on the One Audit, really a preview for the One Audit Bootcamp that I know we'll touch on later. So I'm excited to, be here today.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to our discussion as well. So, just as a brief intro, you can read here, folks, a little bit about ControlCase and their work in certification, cybersecurity, and compliance. And my team is focused on research and advisory. Kishore and I have been working together for a couple of years. I'm a great admirer of the ControlCase platform. And I think that if you stick around for the webinar, you're going to learn something. I know that I have. Kishore, real quickly, say a couple words about the One Audit Bootcamp before we get into our agenda.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ed. Yep. So our One Audit Bootcamp is a 2-hour session that's on demand. And it really focuses on how you can do a single assessment and comply and get certified to 4 regulations: PCI DSS, ISO 27001, SOC 2, and then the HIPAA standard. So One Audit is a ControlCase process that's enabled through the ControlCase Compliance Hub. As you can see at www.controlcase.com/courses, anyone can register and take a bootcamp on One Audit, which is a single assessment and complying to 4 standards: PCI DSS, ISO, SOC 2, and HIPAA.
That's a wonderful summary. I hope people will take some time and look into it. I know I helped you with some of the material around that. I learned quite a bit about audit and compliance in doing so, so I hope people enjoy the process.
Now, Tag Cyber has been a great partner in kind of helping us really build this. So, really appreciate all your help and Tag Cyber's help as well in this.
You bet. I think we learned more than we provided. We came out of it much smarter about these topics, so it was good for us. But Kishore, these are the topics we'll take people through today. These 7 topics, a little bit about the company intro. I'll let you do that. Then I'll take people through some of the challenges of multiple compliance standards, a little bit of on the advantage of simplifying that to one. Say a couple words about common domains, and then Kishore, you can take them through the evidence processing, a little bit about compliance programs and how you maintain an ongoing presence, and then some more about the boot camp. Kishore, does that look okay? I think this looks like a nice packed agenda here.
That sounds like a great plan.
Very good. Well, why don't we start by having you give a brief introduction to ControlCase. That'll be a good backdrop for our discussion.
Great. Thank you. So we at ControlCase really focus on IT security compliance, and certifications is really core and center to what we do at ControlCase. Broadly speaking, we have 2 main offerings: IT security certification and then continuous compliance. We are based outside the Washington, D.C. area, but we are a global company and have customers all over the world, more than 275 people on staff. And our focus really is to make IT security compliance a scalable process, as well as a continuous process. As we go to the next slide, the 2 pillars that ControlCase really focuses on are, number 1, a partnership approach. So we're not just a checklist auditor. We really partner with our customers to make sure that things are being done better. The compliance process is working better, more automated, but at the same time, in a manner that improves the security posture of the company. And a big part of that is our people, but also our platform, the ControlCase Compliance Hub, that streamlines soup to nuts process of collection of evidence, automation in evidence, and then certifications themselves. As we go to the next slide, we'll basically look at some of the IT security certifications that ControlCase does. These are very popular. Now, the One Audit Bootcamp really is focused on 4 of these certifications: PCI DSS, ISO 27001, SOC 2, and HIPAA. This is a view of the ControlCase Compliance Hub. And what customers find really useful is the fact that any given time, they can tell where they are in their one audit process. So a good way to look at this is the green pie chart that you're looking at. On day 1, when we work with customers, that pie chart is red, which means we have to start collecting evidence. And as it goes through the different processes, the pie chart becomes more and more green. The day the pie chart is fully green is when a company is certified, in this case, to 4 different standards.
That is a great introduction to the company. We'll hear quite a bit more as we move through the material. So thanks for that foundational component. Now, what I'd like to do is take a couple minutes and just share a little bit of insight into the problems that exist for a lot of enterprise teams of all sizes and in all sectors when it comes to dealing with multiple compliance standards. There's really 3 things that characterize a compliance standard. That's the language that's used, the references that are included in the requirements, and then the associated process that's done for establishing either compliance or non-compliance and identifying gaps and so on. The problem is that as you go from one compliance standard to the next, these are different. And it's ironic because at the root, most of these standards are asking for very similar types of emphasis areas and controls and functional capability. So they're all more or less asking, in sort of a colloquial sense, they're asking the same question in different languages. So it can be very frustrating for security teams because what happens is it introduces additional cost and complexity to training. So obviously teams need to be educated on how the compliance standards can impact the business. It changes the nature of the documentation process. It's going to vary between the different standards. Certainly tooling could be complicated. You might end up with multiple platforms depending on the requirements that exist. Assessment fees can be very high because you have people who have expertise in each area, and you end up, in some cases, paying those high fees to cover the different required frameworks. And then finally, tracking all of this can just be a nightmare. So this should be very familiar to a number of people who are looking at this, who would say, that looks like my situation, dealing with that. You might have a dozen or 2 dozen, it could be 5 dozen different standards. I come from a telecom background, and I can tell you that we were closer to 5 dozen than 2 dozen, that's for sure, in terms of the compliance standards that needed to be tracked. So this can be a real problem. So a methodology that makes sense, I think a very rational management decision that anyone would come to is determining whether there's some way to streamline this. You'd like to have one interface to a compliance framework that then on the back end will provide some support to each of the constituent frameworks. And that's what's drawn here. This is, I know you'll see in a bit that this is kind of the design principle that Kishore and the team used in building their platform. But just in general, just from a pure, really generic compliance perspective, this is a nice concept. You don't want to be answering the same question over and over and over and over again. It's sort of like when you have a home inspector come to your house to maybe you're selling it, you want to do a punch list on the things that need to be fixed. Once you take a home inspector around once, you wouldn't do that 20 more times. It doesn't make sense. There's significant diminishing returns as you go through those additional processes. If you had to, you'd like to just do it once and have a back end that took care of that. Let's say the state, the town, your county, the country, we're all asking you to provide gap analysis. Well, if I can do it once and then have all that information provided to the back end consumers, compliance data, then that's awesome. And you can see all the benefits that come with that. It's in the same areas that we talked about a minute ago. You'll see that it eases the training process considerably, train in one framework. And Kishore mentioned a moment ago the One Audit Bootcamp, which I think is a nice approach. Documentation certainly simplified significantly. You have one format. Yes, the format will be translated into multiple different frameworks for, say, for audit and for establishing proof, but to the user, it's not something that you would have to attend to. That's the beauty of automation. Get platform tooling, reduce all the procurement and related complexities of dealing with multiple platforms. Assessment fees and maintenance all go down. So there's a lot of really good reasons, business reasons, for trying to find a way to go from multiple compliance frameworks to one. Now there's some technical kind of issues. I'm going to take you through just a few foundational domain and reference definitions and impact that comes with moving to a single framework. And then I'll turn it over to Kishore to translate some of these things into a more practical compliance setting. But you can imagine that if you are dealing with multiple frameworks, it could very easily be the case that simple words like asset or attacker could have different meanings. I mean, it seems like they should mean the same thing, but think for a moment about asset. That could certainly be something very different from one standard to another, from one framework to another. When you read NIST 800-53, for example, you read sometimes very loose references and even definitions that are somewhat circular. Just weave that into dealing with multiple frameworks and you can see the real problems that emerge there. So simplifying and going to a more common terminology, definitions, and conceptual model, gigantic advantage of going to one framework. So that's kind of the, I almost think of that as the theory or the foundation. I want to give you a few minutes of that before we get into some of the real details here that Kishore will take us through. And we're going to start with the idea of unified evidence processing. Kishore, why don't you take us through a little bit of the detail and how this is done properly and how it would translate into your platform.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Thanks for that introduction on various exciting topics. So, when we talk about IT security compliance, I'll take a minute to just talk about what does an assessment look like. We'll certainly weave in one audit later, which is 4 different regulations, but at the basic level, complying to any IT security standard requires artifacts that need to be evaluated by an assessor, just like ControlCase. And so accurate collection and a streamlined collection of evidence plays a big part in streamlining the process. Types of evidence that exist out there are documents, scanned reports, user access lists, and then of course there's interviews and discussions as well, right? So all of this is really collecting evidence through various sources, some system generated, some through interviews, and some through review of policies. We talked about evidence for a second. Now I'll talk about frameworks on the other side, which is, as Ed mentioned earlier, all these different standards have a little bit different kind of terminology. Ed used the example of assets. Certainly, even within regulations, assets could be different things for different regulations. And so what we at ControlCase do is we are mapping essentially the various IT security compliance frameworks to evidence collection through a relationship. And that really forms the basis of one audit and many of the other certifications that we do, which is there is evidence that needs to be collected, and that evidence can probably satisfy one or multiple regulations, and in some cases, multiple subdomains of a regulation. And so at the broadest level, our platform really think of it as a mapping between evidence and frameworks. We talk at a high level about evidence, and we talk at a high level about frameworks, and then how that's connected. Now, next section we're going to now talk about is how do we really establish a process of continuous compliance and frameworks, and how do the frameworks and the evidence kind of match with each other. So the main thing that should be really obvious when customers work with our platform is that the cost and time savings that our customers can take advantage of are significant. We just have some numbers here, just as an example on a very average use case for the 4 regulations that we are talking about. And as you can see, because of our one audit process, if a company had done regulations one at a time, PCI, ISO, SOC 2, and HIPAA one at a time, they would probably spend 2,200 hours. By doing one audit, they're actually saving 1,250 hours, or more than half the time, because they have gone through a single process of certifying to these multiple regulations. And so the cost and time savings are significant. Also, it's more accurate because the same evidence can be used for different things. And so you can spend more time making sure that the security posture of the company is correct and that the company comes out better after the assessment than it started before the assessment. And then it's an annual process, so we continuously make progress every year. This is a very high-level approach to what we call one audit. And I know in the bootcamp for 2 hours, we'll be talking about lots of details. But at the broadest level, we do what we call a consolidated pre-assessment, which is single assessment to make sure we're collecting the evidence for the 4 regulations. At any given time, there are dashboards. And then we absolutely have to make sure we follow the regulations of accreditation bodies, whether it's the ISO accreditation body or the PCI DSS security standards. And so we have weaved in the consolidated pre-assessment, and then we have weaved in the process for kind of individual components that are required for the 4 regulations in question. I won't go through each one in detail, but as you can see, when we're talking about one audit, what we have really done is taken the evidence, we've taken the framework, the regulation, and then we have also taken the process of any single certification and mapped it to each other so that we and the customer are in compliance with the different accreditation requirements as well, which again is a little different in every case. As you go to the next slide, you'll see at a little bit more higher level how something like this would work and certification would work, right? So you can see every regulation has its individual requirements. For example, ISO 27001 requires a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit, which may not be required for some of the other regulations, but other regulations may have other quality assurance and reporting requirements. So we have kind of weaved the framework, the evidence, and this entire certification process into a streamlined methodology, which we call One Audit. And the One Audit Bootcamp will really walk you through the minutiae details of how you as a company can really avail itself to do a single assessment and comply to these 4 standards and come out with audit reports and final assessment reports for these 4 regulations. And so we talked about the frameworks, we talked about the regulations, we talked about the process. At this point, I will talk a little bit about the bootcamp itself. If you go to www.controlcase.com and go to our courses section, anyone is able to register for the ControlCase One Audit Bootcamp. It's a free course, and it gives you step-by-step how a company can go about availing itself to doing one audit, which is a single assessment and certifying to multiple standards. Both me and Ed have gone through and really explained various components of the one audit really methodology within that bootcamp. So certainly feel free to send the details about the bootcamp to other people in your company. If you are an assessment company, you could also benefit from it. Of course, if you have to be compliant with multiple regulations, you can certainly benefit from it. Again, on our website, in the courses section, you can today go and sign up for the One Audit Bootcamp. And you do get a certificate of a One Audit certified assessor once you have gone through the entire course. The ControlCase One Audit Bootcamp, it's about 2 hours, give or take. You can do it in one sitting, or you can break it up into, there's 4 sections. You can certainly break it up and do it on demand. we really focus on the 4 regulations, as I mentioned earlier: PCI DSS, HIPAA, SOC 2, and ISO 27001. We certainly show you an overview of the one audit process, some of which we talked about earlier here will be repeated there, but then we'll get into the minutia details and go through question by question of how things are mapped to which platform and what does each question actually mean. You can come out of this bootcamp with a ready methodology to do a single assessment and get compliant to all these 4 standards, irrespective of whether you want to get certified or not. You certainly can get compliant to all the 4 standards after coming out of this bootcamp and using some of that content. And then you can choose later whether you want to, get certified to one or multiple pieces as well. But certainly this would help you go through how the process is streamlined. Ed, I'd like, again, to thank you for, helping us put this at
you bet.
together.
Kishore, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What kind of feedback are you getting from students who've taken the time to go through the one audit? Do you have they found the material to be applicable to the typical work activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So folks who have already taken it, they have really enjoyed the fact that even though they were traditionally maybe involved in one regulation, they've learned about other regulations, and in some cases, they've realized that they're more compliant than they thought to these other regulations and are closer to compliance to these regulations that they might have not thought of in the past. And so they have been able to compare and contrast the different regulations and have enjoyed the fact that they are now being able to use that internally within their companies to streamline the process.
Well, what about if someone is not a compliance expert? Is that a real problem? Do they need to come to this as a experienced compliance expert, or can someone come to this maybe who's new to this type of work?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another great question. Certainly, you don't have to be a IT security compliance expert to come and take this course, because we at ControlCase have converted all these IT compliance regulations into English-like questions that a layman can understand. And so our whole premise of one audit and simplifying is that we want to do the heavy lifting to build the questionnaires in a format that people can understand, but it's really English-like terms. And, for example, you'll see a question that might talk about, please provide user access lists, right? And people will understand, if it's just some knowledge of IT in general. And you could be from different fields. You could be from HR, you could be from operations, you could be from legal. Everyone can benefit from it. Don't have to be an expert. And in fact, you'll come out of the course understanding compliance much better. And it's not only a course, it's actually you come out with the actual questions that exist that you can use in your organization to have this common reference to multiple regulations as well.
I would imagine the only prerequisite here is that it would be someone who has the ability to either answer the questions or go find the answers, right? Because in some of them,
correct.
The answers probably would be evident immediately. And in others, there might be something that requires that they go check with a system administrator or with a business process owner or something. Do I have that right? I'm guessing that's
Absolutely.
a little bit of
that's
back
exactly.
end work, right?
That's absolutely right. You hit the nail on its head.
Very good. Well, listen, I want to thank you on behalf of the people listening. Certainly want to thank you for the sharing about one audit. I urge people to go do it. I think it's good learning. And as always, Kishore, it's my pleasure to spend some time with you and with your team. And I hope people enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for sharing, Kishore.
Thank you, Ed. Have a good day. It was a really good project. And again, as I said, always great to do these webinars with you. Look forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. On behalf of ControlCase and TaxCyber, thank you, everybody. And we do hope you go to the One Audit Bootcamp and are able to take advantage of those streamlined processes and content. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.